Hello, everyone. Great. Hello, hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi, welcome, everybody. We'll just wait till everybody sort of comes in. Hello, hello. Welcome.
Hi. Hi, all of you. Good to see you all.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll just wait about another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll start because we do have a limit on our Zoom meeting time.
Good evening, all.
Just to remind everybody that there is a chat feature. If you would like to share some things in the chat feature, that's always great. It might be a little bit difficult for me to look for questions in there, although you can post questions in there to see if everybody can answer, only because I'll be leading some other things as well, and that there's so many of you and there's only one of me. I just put a link to the Padlet that's there. This is the personal project Padlet that Lenny Dutton had set up. We'll go to that in just a minute, but if you have any questions, the first, there is sort of a personal project for new teachers post there. That includes the presentation that I'm doing as well, so the slideshow that I'm doing for you, and that's where you can post some questions. And if I don't get to them during this session, I will certainly get to them after this and then answer the questions within the Padlet, the questions there.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Amber.
Sure. Okay, so as we're about 5 minutes after 11, so that gives us about 35 minutes to go through this. Welcome everybody. My name is Amber Reinhardt. I am the personal project coordinator at Lincoln Community School in Accra, Ghana, although currently we are in Germany, where my husband is from. I've been working in the MYP for about 20 years, actually, and I've been a personal project coordinator for about 15 of those years. I'm an examiner for the personal project. I am a workshop leader and a site visitor as well. So I've been around the MYP for most of my career, and in international schools in Africa, Asia, and in Europe. So it's great to see everybody here, and we are just going to go start right ahead. So I'm just going to do a screen share. And then we are going to look at some of the things we have. So when I do a screen share, I can't see everybody there, although, and it's really hard for me to know sort of when you have questions. So again, if you do have any questions, I just ask this Padlet here, if you just want to post your questions here, and that way then everybody can see them, and then we can have the response for them. The slideshow that I have is here as well that we'll be going through today. So please feel free to use this, right? And then to go back through if you need to. So then a couple things. This Padlet itself is really, really helpful. It has a ton of resources on it for the personal project. Lenny and I have both been adding things, as well as some other members of our MYP community. Just a reminder, there's a few other personal project meetings coming up, including a standardization one that I'm leading on Monday. Lenny and I have shared our websites here. I'll go over mine for a little bit today as well. We have, Lenny's working on a guide. There are videos to start to introduce your personal project. There's a WhatsApp group. Asheka has been running tons of WhatsApp groups through MYP. So there is a personal project one. You're more than welcome to join. And anyway, just take some time, go through this, because there are quite a lot of resources on here. And then without further ado, we will begin. So, personal project for new teachers, welcome. It's so good to see everybody here. How I'd like to start this is just talk about sort of the context of the personal project within the continuum of the IB and where it stands. Here it is in the IB Middle Years program sort of outline. And what's interesting is that sort of the student, of course, is at the center here, and they're surrounded by sort of approaches to teaching, the global context, the concepts, and the ATL skills. And then that's where we see the personal project and the community project there, but also with their action and service. It is even before we get to the subjects. So that it really is an integral part of how we view the project itself and how it is within the MYP. So it's part of the IB continuum. It's the culminating project for the MYP. The personal project, the PYP has the exhibition, the diploma has the extended essay, and we have the personal project. CP, of those of you who are familiar, also have a project that they do, but I didn't include it because there's so few of us who have the CP. But they're all research. They all have some form of written, can you see this here? Product, and they're all personal choices, right? The students get to choose what topic that they choose to do their personal project on. So the idea is that the assessment aims in the MYP, so the personal project is part, it's the culminating assessment, right? And it is indeed, and that's what it is as its feature. It is an assessment piece. And what are the aims of the assessment in the MYP? Well, we want students to learn and progress by getting feedback, right? And we see those feedback cycles within the personal project as well with their relationship with their supervisor. We want to improve our teaching by what we see. And for those of you who are new to the MYP, you'll see that when you start to implement the personal project, there are some holes in the program when you start to implement it, because all of a sudden the students will have questions about global context, or they'll have questions about command terms, and you'll say like, oh, maybe we don't do this so well at our school, and we need to improve those teaching practices. They provides opportunities for students to have transdisciplinary skills. So they have, all sort of our ATL skills, and certainly all of the categories are in the personal project. And hopefully it promotes positive student attitudes towards their learning. And I think with a personal project, one of the most important parts is that they can choose anything they want to do in any area, and we really see that positive attitude there. I really like this quote because I think sort of it's, in some of our assessments that we see this in the MYP, but the personal project I think can counter this. Everything that can be counted does not necessarily count, and everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted. And what our students learn in this process isn't necessarily what we score them on, for better or worse, and we'll look at that when we look at the assessment criteria. So what is it? So I guess I'm just going to stop here and sort of come back. Are there any sort of questions? I don't see any questions in the chat, but does anybody have any sort of clarifying questions about where the personal project stands within the whole program? Just a reminder, you guys are all on mute, and so an easy way to do that is just to press your space bar and then you're unmuted. But does anybody have any, or anybody raising their hands, if they can do that too? I don't see any hands raised. Nope. All right. We'll go back. Oop. So what is the personal project? Well, it's personal. It's this culminating assessment. They, over the course of year 5, so the final year of the program, they engage in a rigorous inquiry, research, and action in order to achieve a goal of their own design, right? So they choose the goal that they do for the personal project. They do the research that goes through that goal. They inquiry into it, and then they produce this product or outcome, and then they write their report on that. And we'll look at that. We'll look at that cycle in just a minute. But it's the student's chance to do what they want, right? It's personal, and I keep wanting to stress this so many. It's not their parents' report. It's not what their teacher thinks that they should do. It is their choice, and it has to be, and that's part of how they're even assessed on it, right? Can they show that personal interest and that personal connection to it? It's extended. And I sometimes feel like the grade 10s, our year 5 students, work harder than some of our diploma students, right? They take 8 MYP classes. They often don't have study halls or breaks, which we sometimes see in the TOK or the IB core, the DP core classes. And they have to work on this basically outside of school. So it's a pretty intense year and it's a pretty intense project. And hopefully we can alleviate some of that with our guidance to them. It's creative, right? It's a product or an outcome. They can make something or they can do something. And hopefully it shows the skills from the MYP. So what's the purpose? Oops, sorry guys. It allows students to demonstrate their ability to connect and transfer their extensive skills, knowledge, and understandings, right? What they've learned, what they know, and who they are, that they've acquired in one or more of the MYP disciplines to a global context, right? So why does it matter? In order to achieve a meaningful goal of their own design. And we're gonna hear this a lot, those pronouns, right? That this is really, really personal. I think that's one of the most important aspects to the personal project. So aims. We want them to participate in a sustained self-directed inquiry, right? With a global context, right? Remember there's 6 global contexts in the MYP. They choose one that applies to their project, to their goal, to their outcome. And it gives it meaning, it gives it relevance. It says sort of, you know, Ms. Reinhardt didn't just tell you to do a project and you had to do it. Why does this really matter in real life, you know, in sort of the larger context, just outside of school? Hopefully they will develop new insights, deeper understandings, right? That they'll sort of know something more than what they did, and they have to reflect on that in the report as well. So they demonstrate these skills that they've shown that they get self-management as part of this. Can they sustain this project over time? They have to communicate in so many different ways, right? So oftentimes we're seeing here some of these ATL skills, and communication is a huge one in this, whether that's written, whether that's through feedback, whether that is from through their supervisor, right? Through email communication, through verbal communication, through their peers. So we see communication is a huge, huge skill in this. They have to be responsible for their actions, right? Or sometimes their projects don't always work out, and that may not necessarily be their fault, but that they're responsible for, that they take responsibility for their actions. And hopefully they'll take pride in it. And a lot of times we see this come out through the exhibition, which is one of the most wonderful celebrations I think a school can do. Okay, so purpose. So it is the, again, culminating assessment, right? There's even discussion that this is really the only true summative of the MYP. If we want to look at sort of what our classes are doing for assessments, that perhaps those are all real formative, that this is really the summative assessment of this program. It's sustained self-directed inquiry, right? They're inquiring into a question that they've asked, a goal that they've created, and they're trying to create that outcome then for that. They'll demonstrate their skills, right? What they can do, what they know, and who they are. They apply and analyze their ATL skills that hopefully that we've been teaching them for the last 5 years of the program, that they can now apply them all. And of course, it has to do with our standards and practices, right? Including the new standards and practice that are out. It's about philosophy. We see it in the leadership and structure standards and practices, resources and support, written curriculum, and assessment. It is through all 4 major areas of our new standards and practices. So it's a value. So here's the cycle for the personal project. If you are an art teacher or a design teacher, then you are very familiar with this. It is, oops, sorry about that. Why can't I go back? Here we go. It is, you investigate, you plan it, you do it, and then you reflect on it. And these 4 parts of the design cycle, we see as the 4 different parts of the report and the 4 different criteria as well. So I just see a couple things that came up in the chat, but now I can't see that. Here we go. I'm just gonna pull the chat up here. All right, and then I'll sort of answer those questions as we come to the end. We will have some time at the end. Okay, oh my gosh. Hello, Zoom. All right, so I can't see, move this chat. Now, let's see. All right, so the, oh my gosh. Sorry, everyone. I just can't seem to move this chat. Why can't I do that? Here. We'll come back here and then we'll see if this works. Here we go. I have the chat here. So one of the questions was, can students select more than one global context? No, they can only select one global context. And the reason for that is because it has to be focused, right? If they're doing one goal, then they have one global context that fits with them. They could have multiple that could work, but they need to figure out what they want to do. So for example, if a student's making a documentary about poaching in Uganda, which one of my students has done, then their goal has to be, is it about making the documentary, the skills and the technical aspects of making a film or a documentary, or is it about the topic of poaching? So depending on what the student really wants to focus their goal on will help them determine what the global context is. Because it could be about fairness and development or globalization and sustainability, which would be about the poaching aspect, or it could be about scientific and technical innovation, which might be the documentary aspect. So again, only one global context. When is the correct time to start report writing? So that depends on your timeline anyway. And then if you look at the Padlet itself, you'll see some example timelines. And I would say that for students, they need about 2 solid months to write the report. Does the goal have to be something for the benefit of society? The goal can be anything as long as it has value. So if it has value for the student and their personal benefit, then that's also a value. So if the student wants to write music, for instance, or they want to perform this piece on the piano, then they are more than welcome to do that goal because it benefits themselves. It does not necessarily have to benefit a larger community, which is what the community project is much more on. And somebody had asked privately about virtual personal project exhibition ideas. Those ideas are also on the Padlet if you would like to look. There's a couple different formats on there, and then you can have, you can look there for some ideas. All right, let's go back in. All right, so here's sort of the framework or sort of the timeline of any personal project. So the students start their goal, they plan, they research, and they develop that process in the process journal. We'll talk more about the process journal later, but that is one of the most important aspects of the personal project itself, is how the students are documenting their process. I refer to it more as a portfolio because I think process journal, people start to think that it has to be bound and it has to be paper. And actually it can take multiple formats, multiple media for each student, depending on what they're doing in that process. So during that time, they're discussing their process with their supervisors. Also on the Padlet, we've given you different meeting topics for supervisors and different questions that the supervisors could be asking as well. So those are some examples there. They demonstrate their learning in a final product or outcome. And sometimes this is confusing. So a product would be something that the students made. So one of my students, this year, gosh, they made so many things. Let me, so one of my students, so for music, for example, he was looking at making 5 different songs that he originally composed and then recorded. So he has his own sort of like track or CD that he has. Another one of my students did a football tournament for local girls from a local orphanage near our school in Ghana. And so that was an outcome. Like she didn't have anything, she couldn't turn in the physical tournament, but she turned in evidence of that tournament. So that's the difference between product and outcome. They then reflect on that in the report. And unfortunately, there's lots of controversy with this, but this is where all the scores come from, is what's in the report. Obviously, what they do in this whole part of the process before then matters with how well they'll do in the report. But this is where they're scored. This is where the 4 criteria come from, is the report. And then at your school, you can celebrate their achievements at the exhibition, which has nothing to do with the grade. It cannot be a part of the final score or final levels of the personal project, but it's a wonderful way to celebrate the achievements. I mean, 7 months of work. It's a wonderful community event to get parents and other students in. We always personally invite the grade 9 and the grade 5s in because their grade 9s will be doing it the next year, and grade 5s are doing their own exhibition with the PYP. So it's a wonderful way for them to share. So supervisors. There's always a bit of controversial on how we choose supervisors or who gets to be a supervisor. But at my school, we say that if you are an MYP teacher, you are a personal project supervisor. Regardless of what other courses you teach, you have to at least supervise one student. Their supervisors are required to meet with our students at least 3 times, and that's according to the IB during this process. As coordinator, I meet with the students much more. I do my own workshops with them as well, but supervisor's role is to help them through the process. It is not, they don't have to know the content of that. That's where a mentor comes in. But a supervisor's role, again, here is holistic and process-based, right? They're not editing the work for grammar mechanics. They're not ensuring that they understand birding in Ghana, which is what one of my students did as well, but they're to help with the process of this and to help the students along with that. Again, supervisor responsibilities are here. This is all in the further guidance in the MYP projects guide. But these are exactly what a supervisor should do. And it's really about guidance, relationships, answering questions, and then they are confirming the authenticity of it. They also participate in moderation and standardization of that at the end of the school year, at the end before we turn in our projects onto IBIS with their final scores. Okay, so there's 3 parts. There is the process journal, which I like to call the portfolio. This is where students they have to gather all the evidence of their research and their process in order to create their product. This can be research notes, this can be source evaluations, this can be a list of references, this can be plans, this can be timelines. There's a whole series of what can go into process journals, and the further guidance, which we'll look at in just a little bit, has a lot of examples of those in there. They then, from that process journal, they make the product. This is what they do. They have to turn in something. And in my school, we have a date right before the winter holidays where that is due. So they have to do the product, because when we come back, we write the report. And some schools I know have different deadlines, but this helps us really well because it creates a solid deadline for the product to do, because they cannot write the report until they finish the product. And the report, this is where it's scored. This is where all of the 4 criteria are applied. There's 4 sections, just like the design cycle: investigating, planning, taking action, and reflecting. And it cannot be written until the product's done. Okay, so we're going to go into the personal project 4 criteria in just a minute. Before we go back, are there any questions? I see a question here. Should students write in personal project journal criteria-wise? I don't think I understand that question. It's like, so should they plan their process journal based on the criteria? They can very well do that. And if you look at the four areas of it, it certainly is divided into those things. Like, let me see if I can share this with you. So let me just escape from this. There are so many windows. When you do Zoom, there's like 6 windows that come up, so it's really hard to see. So this is my website from my school. This is what I created for the students, and this is also on the Padlet for you to help you. So if you look at the like the criteria here, actually let's do this one. So here I have a section on the process journal. And then, so what they've done is here, this is all from the further guidance as well. So they've said that if this is criterion A, if this is investigating, right? If you need to define your goal, if you need to show what you learn before you've come to this project, why you're interested in it, and you need to show your research skills, here's some examples of process journaling that could be done. The way that the report is set out is pretty much like in chronological order of how it's gone, the project should go. So they can organize their process journal by this, but they don't have to. Because as we know in life, not everything is linear. And the design cycle is set up to where, you know, you go a bit further and then you have to jump back and reflect and change and modify and then go further and you learn something new and then you can go back and do. So, I mean, yes and no. If it's helpful for a student to organize their process journal like this, it will certainly be easier at the end when they have to choose the extracts for their report, but it's not necessary. Okay, so
I had a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's not exactly closely related to what we're speaking right now, but this question has been on my mind.
Mhm.
So I have gone through the subject reports, and all of the subject reports mention the same grade boundaries. So do the grade boundaries really vary year by year based on the performance? Like I'm an INS teacher, so
Mhm.
the subject reports for the INS groups, the grade boundaries vary between years. But for personal project, so far as what I've seen, they're the same. So I wanted clarity on that. Yeah.
Yep. So as far as the grade boundaries are concerned for our subjects, they are absolutely the same, and they stay the same. But as far as the personal project, they can vary, and they have varied a little bit year from year. Just like if any of us are diploma teachers, we see that in our, we see that in our diploma classes and our IAs as well. So yeah, they do vary, but not by much. So right now when we do the report cards for our year 5 students, we will give them a predicted personal project score, and we'll use the grade boundaries from 2019 to do that.
Yeah, no, sorry, but my question, I have gone through the subject reports, I think last 5 subject reports, and they've not varied any bit. I mean, there is no variation at all.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas in my subject INS, I have found the grade boundaries vary. So I was actually wondering whether does it vary at all in personal project or not?
It can.
It can. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's just see. We have a few more questions. I see goal is not supposed to be multi-dimensional. I think a goal, I'm not sure I understand that one, but a goal should be specific. It should have an audience. It should have a purpose. It should have a content, and it should probably have a timeline to it. And so a goal is it's not sort of like, can I make music? It needs to be much more specific than that. And I have some goals on my website as well that you can look at. How can I take record of this session? Well, one, we're recording all of these Zooms, and those go up on the Zoom IB Educators Google site, which is where you found this Zoom itself, and so the recorded sessions are there. Yeah, so like I said, a SMART goal, absolutely, and that's what it should be. How do I guide students to brainstorm their interest? Those are, Lenny has a lot of great examples on her website, how to guide brainstorms. I've given some on mine, like how to choose your goal. And the idea is that, we cannot create that goal for them or to tell them what they need to do. The students eventually just need to decide. And so we have a lot of different ways to get them interested and try to sort of, help them make those decisions. I find it's always really good to start with our year 4 or our grade 9 students, particularly after the exhibition. I will have a session with my grade 9 students in May, actually, and we'll do that online. I'll do a Zoom meeting with them, and that will just try to get them to brainstorm what they're interested in or what they always wanted to do. And then they just have to narrow down their choices. But there has to be a deadline to when they finally make a decision, because they kind of have to get on it. They just have to do it. So Barbara, I see that was your question. If you would like to go to our websites, and also I think the Padlet has some ways as well you can see. I think that's all for questions now, and then we'll go just into the final criteria, and we're about 10 minutes away. So I think we're doing great for time, everyone. Okay, so there are 4 criteria for the personal project for the final report. The first one is investigating, and the way that each criteria are set up, if everybody could just mute themselves, that would be great. It's really hard. Thank you, I appreciate that. I try to have everybody muted on arrival, but I'm not sure that works very well. Thank you. Then investigate, each criteria is broken up into 3 different strands. And each one of these strands is scored individually when then they come together then for a holistic score for this criteria. So this one in particular, investigating, I find very, very difficult because there's a lot of stuff in here. So investigating, you're looking at goal, especially like this A1, goal, global context, personal interest, and then they have to make sure that their goal is challenging. So there's actually 4 different things for A1, for this whole strand that we're looking at when we try to do this score, when we look at moderating. The standardization activity, or the next Zoom session on Monday, we'll be looking at this criteria, because I do find this one the most complicated one. I find D the easiest, if that helps, but I find A the most difficult, because there's so much in here. And we'll talk about how the process, basically, of both standardization, and then you'll get to moderation. They also have to identify prior learning, both in school and out of school, and how they apply that. And then they have to demonstrate research skills. Planning is they develop a plan. They actually then have to do it. They have to explain what they did in the development of the project. And then they have to show their self-management skills, what they knew before, what was developed during this process, and then examples of that in the process journal. Taking action is just what we think it is. It's that product. And then they have to explain how it relates to the goal, the global context, and the criteria that they created. They have to show their thinking skills and communication and social skills. And you can see that all 5 categories of the ATL skills are assessed in the personal project. Reflecting, they evaluate, so they use their success criteria that they created in order to evaluate their product or their outcome. What is the level that they think that it should be, and why? They have to reflect on how they extended their knowledge of their topic, right? Remember we talked about knowledge and the global context. What do they know now that they didn't know when they started? And then they talk themselves as an IB learner. And an IB learner is not just the IB learner profile. This is them perhaps as some of their ATL skills, perhaps they're learning in the future. What will that mean for them as a diploma student or as a university student? And then really, how did this process help them and know them about their self and their learner? We're at the end here. And there was something I just wanted to share with you real quick in our last few minutes, and that's the further guidance, which has a lot of this, which has a lot, is it this one? No, I think it's here. Yeah, so the further guidance, one thing that's super important when you get to standardizing and moderating the personal project are the command terms. And this is something that I find that is great for all of us as MYP teachers. We have certain command terms associated with our own subject areas, but particularly in the personal project, it's really important to how we get to when we standardize the work. And so what the further guidance has done, which is great, you have sort of, if they're getting a level in 1 and 2, they're only stating things. They're only stating their goal or stating the challenge or stating what they knew before. They're not explaining that or justifying that or developing that. And they have here, and it's really helpful to look at these command terms and then to know then how things are scored. So if they were to get a 7-8, they need to do all of this before, plus they need to justify them. They need to justify their goal, why it's highly challenging to them. They need to meaningfully relate their goal to the global context. So they really need to start transferring and synthesizing their thinking in this highest level. And using the command terms is really, really helpful. And it's really helpful for our students to understand as well. When they turn in their drafts, this is the discussion that I have with them. If we look at their goal sentence, have they stated it? Have they outlined it? Or have they justified it? So I find that part really, really helpful. So we have about 5 minutes remaining. Are there any final questions that we have sort of in these last sort of 5 minutes or so? Thank you everyone who's adding to the chat and adding that link to the Padlet. So how much time should be given to students to make the product? Well, there's a lot that has to do with that process because they have to research first, and then they have to go and they have to make the product itself. So one thing, we sort of plan it where August I have a retreat for the students, for the grade 10 students, and I'll do a whole day with them outside of school, and they have from August until December in order to do their research and in order to make their product. So August, September, is that 4 months or so. And again, if you go to Padlet, my timeline is on there, and it's divided up into the investigating, planning, taking action, and then reflecting sections as well. So you can see sort of the timeline. We start in August, and their report is due in February, if that helps at all. Difference between a supervisor and a mentor. A supervisor is from the school. They are an MYP teacher. This is my son Noah, who's joined us in these last few minutes. Home teaching. Hold on, no. Supervisor is an MYP teacher. They are about the personal project and the process. A mentor can be anyone. They don't have to be a teacher. They're just somebody who has experience in either the topic, the subject, or the skills. So for instance, one of my students made bamboo beds for an orphanage that his family has a pretty strong relationship with. So his mentor was one of the carpenters in Accra. So he worked with this man, Moses, I think was his name. So he worked with Moses, and that was his mentor because he's an expert in that field. But he doesn't necessarily know anything about the personal project and doesn't have to. He just needs to know about helping him with the skills or the content. Yeah, students can work without mentors. They don't have to have them, and that's all student choice. And they have to find their own. I don't help them. So. Where can I get some good personal project samples? So my IB has 4 really good samples. They've done it with like A, B. They've done it with the investigating. The 4 different criteria. They've done those 4 samples, and they've given reasons why and justification why for them. Oftentimes it's very difficult to get some good or some high level samples. I would suggest talking to other personal project supervisors and sharing samples with one another. So if your school has a 6 or a 7 that you know of, anonymize it and then share it with your peers. And that's what we've done with my personal project friends. That's what we've done, sort of share those. Anybody else? Any last questions? I'll just wait. Okay, thanks everyone. And please feel free to go back to the Padlet and then to use these resources that we've shared with you. There is a place for questions as well on the Padlet. And please feel free to ask some questions there if you think of some even afterwards. And Lenny and I have been going through and answering those questions. So great to see you. And if you're interested, Monday is a standardization. If you're interested in doing a standardization of part of a personal project, we'll see you there. So thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.